Turbocharging NA Falcons has become extremely popular in recent years, with a lot of people talking about how great it is to do, including yours truly. But before you go ahead and decide to turbocharge your NA Falcon, there's some things that you should probably know about first. Otherwise, instead of having a high horsepower car, you might end up with broken rods and dreams. Let's start with compression and talk about why you need to think about it before trying to add 30 pounds of boost to your barra. Compression ratio is basically the difference in volume in the cylinder from when the piston is at the bottom of its rotation to the top of its rotation, pretty much this space here. Now, high compression ratio actually leads to more power being made because you're compressing the air-fuel mixture more tightly. However, it has a pretty serious drawback. Because you're compressing the air-fuel mixture more, it makes it hotter, which leads this mixture to be more likely to suffer from detonation. To counter this, you need higher knock-resistant fuel, or higher octane fuel basically. And once you add a turbocharger into the mix, you're adding more pressurized air into this highly compressed situation, which in turn leads to higher risks of detonation. So you have to use even higher knock-resistant fuel to be able to counter this. This is why the turbo barras have lower compression. It allows for more boost and lower octane fuel to be used without the risk of detonation. It's pretty common for NA barras to have to use E85 to handle the same boost as what a turbo barra would be able to achieve with 98. So before you turbocharge your NA Falcon, you need to consider whether you're willing to run E85 full time to achieve higher boosts, or maybe you're willing to have lower boost and stick with 98, or if you're going to run a flex fuel sensor and just have higher boost on E85 and lower boost on 98. The next big thing to consider is the driveline. Now, just like compression ratios, the driveline is a pretty hard limiter on how much power or torque, in this case, the NA Falcons are able to handle. If you've got a manual gearbox, you're actually going to be in a pretty good position. That's because the T56 and the TR6060s are actually really good gearboxes. And most people find that all they have to do is change the clutch and they'll be able to handle whatever power people throw at them, and you'll start breaking rods and pistons and diffs and all sorts of other things before you end up breaking the gearbox. Now, if you've got an auto, it's a slightly different situation. I give a more detailed breakdown of the differences between the NA and the Turbo ZF 6HP26 gearboxes in my video on actually swapping my NA ZF to a Turbo one. But the short version is the NA ZF won't be as happy in higher torque, higher horsepower situations as the Turbo one will be. Pretty much what you'd expect. You can compensate for this a lot by swapping to the turbo torque converter, which does fit inside the NA ZF valve body, and you can also swap to the turbo tune for the gearbox. The turbo tune has much higher torque reduction, which will allow for this gearbox to last a lot longer. The rest of the driveline, though, is going to be something of a limitation. The tail shaft, the diff, the axles, they're all slightly smaller, lower spline count versions of what the turbo models have. It's pretty simple to swap all of them out, and honestly doesn't cost all that much, but it is an added cost if you're running on a budget. However, if you're looking at a fairly reasonable low to mid boost, low to mid torque environment from your build, you're probably not going to have any problems with the factory NA tail shaft and diff and all that anyway, unless you're really planning to thrash it. And now we get to tuning and boost control. Like I've talked about in my other videos, the NA Falcons don't have the turbo wastegate solenoid or the boost sensor to enable controlling boost with the ECU. And even if you wired those in, the NA ECUs are actually missing the hardware required to be able to control these functions. So instead, a lot of people, like myself, use electronic boost controllers to control the turbo wastegate and achieve whatever boost you're aiming for instead. While this works, it doesn't have as many safeties and controls and features as what you'd get with having native boost control built into the ECU. I've personally had several problems with using an electronic boost controller due to different weather conditions, due to the way it functions and the way the ECU is basically playing catch up on whatever the electronic boost controller is doing, meaning that things are happening slower and processing slower instead of the ECU just controlling everything and being able to protect the car and the gearbox and everything a lot more safely if everything was just built into it. You could add the wiring needed to run a turbo ECU. You've then got the problem of finding the correct turbo ECU and buying it on its own. Not many people sell just the ECUs on their own. They want to sell a lot of stuff all at once, wiring, sometimes entire engines and gearboxes with it. And then if you've got an auto gearbox, you've got the mess of trying to get the new ECU and the TCU in your existing gearbox to match up as well. These are not insurmountable problems, but they're going to add extra complexity and cost to whatever build you're going to do. So it's something to be aware of before you start this process. Like I said in my NA+T cost breakdown video, it's all about what you can achieve and what you want out of your car. You need to consider, what is it going to cost you? What are you expecting the car to be able to do? And how much work are you willing to put in? And what limitations is the platform that you have going to give you? It's obvious by now that the NA barras can be pushed to some pretty high horsepower territory. It's not uncommon these days to get 600 horsepower with E85. However, the NA Driveline and electronics and all these sorts of things that we talked about in this video are going to be some pretty serious limitations if you can't change them out. However, if you're only aiming for a low to mid power figure and you're only going to run 98 in the future, then it's actually pretty achievable to do these sorts of builds on a very low cost. You just have to be realistic about what it is that you want and what it is that you can achieve.